Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Action!
Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that talks about amazing stories of Tinseltown from another era. Hear fascinating conversations with writer-producer Steve Cubine, who quite literally lives just beneath the Hollywood sign, and actress-writer Nan McNamara. Now your hosts, Steve and Nan.
Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode. Steve, I have to tell you, in preparation for this episode, I have lost a lot of sleep.
You have? Why?
Well, we're going through each decade, talking about our favorite films. We last month covered the 1930s, which was difficult.
It was tough.
This month, we're covering the 1940s. And let me tell you, cutting down that list to just 4 films was about near impossible.
Well, I think this one's even tougher than the 30s.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, this was the decade for movies.
It really was.
Yeah.
When you talk about old Hollywood, it's the 40s.
Yeah, I mean, Citizen Kane, Casablanca, The Best Years of Our Lives, It's a Wonderful Life, The Heiress, Double Indemnity.
Gentleman's Agreement.
I mean, classic, iconic films.
Yeah.
And those are the films we're not even talking about.
Right. Some of them we've covered in previous episodes, so we feel like we don't want to go over territory we've already done. But I think we should just jump right in with our list, and we look forward to hearing what you all's lists are.
Absolutely. And, again, this is all subjective.
Yeah.
This is just movies that just resonate with us from the 40s.
Yes. All right. I'm going to kick it off with, from 1941, The Lady Eve, written and directed by Preston Sturges, based on a story by Monckton Hoff.
Great
oh boy.
choice. Great choice.
This movie. Okay. Colonel Harrington, and Colonel is in air quotes, and his daughter Jean, played by Charles Coburn and Barbara Stanwyck, are card sharks who are traveling first class on a cruise ship with the goal of fleecing the rich passengers. Now, they find their mark pretty quickly in Charles Pike, played by Henry Fonda, a scientist specializing in snakes. Now, did you know, Steve, that if you specialize in snakes, you're either an ophidiologist or a herpetologist? Anyway.
I did not know that.
Well, 2 new words. Try and find those in a sentence this coming week.
Exactly.
But Henry Fonda's character is also a famous heir to a beer empire. So having decided who this con team is going to hit up, Stanwyck trips Fonda in the dining room. He breaks the heel on her shoe. She insists he walk her to her cabin for another pair of slippers, and they fall madly in love.
Of course they do.
So Stanwyck calls off the con, and she's ready to reform her life, but Charles Pike's body man, played by William Demarest, our own Uncle Charlie from My Three Sons.
We love that guy.
He finds out who she really is, tells Charles. Charles dumps Stanwyck. Fast forward, Stanwyck is heartbroken, as is Henry Fonda's character. Sometime later, she has an opportunity to meet up with him again, and she decides to take her revenge on him. She pretends to be, hence the title, Lady Eve Sidwich, a British noble. Charles Pike, Henry Fonda's character, his father, played by another favorite of this podcast, Eugene Pallett, hosts
he's so great.
Yeah, he's fabulous. Hosts a party for Lady Eve. Charles, Henry Fonda, doesn't realize it's the same woman, and her goal for the rest of the film is to get back at him by seducing him into marriage. All right? That's the setup. I'm not going to go into how it ends, because if you haven't seen it, you just have to experience it. But I want to point out 2 things about this film. Number 1, Henry Fonda, known for his dramatic roles up until this point, pretty much, he shows the most tremendous comic chops. His physical comedy is absolutely remarkable. There are no fewer than 4 pratfalls that he makes that are hysterical, completely unexpected. He also plays this role with such sincerity and naivete.
Yes.
It works so beautifully. But of course, the real star of this film is Barbara Stanwyck. I can't imagine not falling in love with her if I were Henry Fonda. She's known up until this point for mainly dramatic roles, playing these working class women. Here she's called upon to be sophisticated, sexy, smart, seductive, and British. I mean, come on. And she does it with such ease. There is a monologue. You can find it on YouTube if you can't find the whole film. In the dining room on the ship, she's looking in her compact mirror at Fonda, who is behind her, and she is giving a running commentary of all the women that are tripping over themselves to meet him.
A little side note.
Yes.
One of those women was actually Brenda Marshall.
Really?
In a very uncredited role.
Oh
yeah.
my gosh, how that's...
She's the one with the long cigarette holder.
Okay. Well, this monologue is a masterclass in comedy and specificity. I happen to have a book that's entitled Movie Monologues for Actors. This monologue is in there. So
it is. Oh,
I
wow.
went back to revisit it. What you see on the page is exactly what she said, but how it comes out of her mind and body and heart, it is absolutely brilliant. She is extraordinary. Stanwyck and Fonda made 3 films together. This one, The Mad Miss Manton, and You Belong to Me. Fonda referred to Stanwyck as his favorite leading lady. Stanwyck enjoyed working with Fonda as well, calling him one-take Fonda because he was always so prepared. The Lady Eve, it's playing on Apple TV and other streaming places.
Oh, such a good choice. And their chemistry was so great
good.
together.
So good.
Well, I'm going to kick it off for myself. And, I've talked a little bit about this on the podcast, but I think anybody who's been listening knows my favorite Western film of all time is The Oxbow Incident from 1943. Most Western films, they're riddled with violence and this sort of shoot-up mentality that tended to define the genre. Well, The Oxbow Incident is the antithesis of this. Even though it's still classified as a Western, it's this beautiful, thought-provoking film that questions the consequences of violence and the morality of citizens taking the law into their own hands. It's a morality tale that pits a lynch mob eager to get justice after one of their own has been murdered and his cattle stolen against a few citizens who think that the law should be followed and the accused murderers should have their fair day in court. Well, the film shows, the dangers of this whole lynch mob mentality, and it depicts the need for law and order and fair justice. The film stars Henry Fonda, another one for Henry.
We got 2 of them.
Yeah, in this iconic role that he is often cited as his favorite film of his.
Okay.
He plays Gil Carter, a more passive man than Fonda had played in other films. Fonda so believed in this film that he actually helped raise money for it, and he worked for scale.
Wow.
From beginning to end, the film was a labor of love for everybody involved, particularly the director, William A. Wellman. It had a great supporting cast, which included Harry Morgan and Mary Beth Hughes, Dana Andrews, Anthony Quinn, Harry Davenport, Frank Conroy, Francis Ford, William Ith, who we've talked about on the podcast, Margaret Hamilton. And this film also reunited Henry Fonda with Jane Darwell, who of course played Ma Joad in The Grapes of Wrath, which they had made together in 1940.
And we talked about her in our Mother's Day episode.
Yeah, well, let's just say that Jane Darwell in this movie is no Ma Joad.
Sounds like she'd be in our bad mama category.
She is a bad mama.
Oh, boy.
Also in the cast, anybody who knows me knows that I have this special place in my heart for Mary Beth Hughes.
Oh, yeah.
She's only in one scene in this movie as Rose Mapin, who's Henry Fonda's saloon girl girlfriend who gets tired of waiting for him and leaves town to marry a respectable rich man.
Oh, boy.
Well, and in her one scene, she encounters Fonda, and they have this wordless exchange that is so powerful and wistful and sad, and it says everything you need to know about their relationship.
Wow.
And it's just a master look at acting.
Yeah.
I mean, they say so much without ever uttering a word.
I think that is the true test of a wonderful film actor is getting the story with no words.
It's so wonderful. Well, the movie, it was nominated for a single Academy Award.
Really?
Best Picture.
Okay, well, that's if you're going to get one.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the few times which a movie has only been nominated for Best Picture and no
Nothing
other
else.
nominations.
Interesting.
Which is odd, because I think it should have been nominated for so many more. I think this film is still so important. I think it resonates today because it reminds us of the often dangerous consequences of this mob-like mentality, which is still kind of relevant today.
Yes, it is.
With social media being so prevalent and news reaching us at lightning speed, we're quick to form opinions and pass judgments before we've actually taken the time to do our own due diligence and find out the truth.
Right.
And I think this movie is just a testament to how we should not do that.
I think that's a perfect choice.
Do your due diligence, find out your own truth before you judge.
Yeah. Great choice, Steve. Great choice. Well, I'm going to jump in with the next selection, which is Penny Serenade from 1941.
Oh, great movie.
Directed by George Stevens, written by Maury Riskind from the story by Martha Chevins. It's told in flashback, and we meet Julie, played by, I think your and mine's favorite, Irene Dunn.
She's next to Barbara Stanwyck,
Yep,
my favorite
between
actress.
the two, I can't quite make up my mind.
Yeah.
If they were standing here, I don't know what I'd say.
And in Myrna Loy.
Yeah, right, and Myrna Loy. So she is getting ready to leave her marriage to Roger, played by Cary Grant, because the love is gone. She's quoted as saying, "We don't need each other anymore. When that happens to two people, there's nothing left." But before she walks out the door with her last suitcase, she decides to listen to their scrapbook of records. And it really is kind of a scrapbook.
Yeah.
And it chronicles their life together. And the first record she puts on is "You Were Meant for Me." And it takes us back to the very beginning of their courtship. And throughout the film, this device is used to tell their story.
It's such a clever device if you think about it.
It is, and it works so well. I mean, I can see a film now using that same device and having it work. What would it be, though? Like an MP3? How do you do that? I don't know. Anyway. But Roger, Cary Grant, is a newspaper reporter. Julie, Irene Dunn, works in a record shop. He sees her through the window, and it's pretty much love at first sight.
Yes.
They date. On New Year's Eve, he comes to a party that she's hosting and tells her that he's been offered a reporter job in Japan. He asks her to marry him, and they do. And the rest of the film chronicles the love that they share, the family they desire, the challenges of marriage, trying to have children. If anyone listening has not seen it, I don't want to give any of the details away. Just have your box of Kleenex ready.
Oh, I can just see the title card pop up and I'm crying.
Yeah, it's really beautifully done. And I think of it as being a story that for that time period was rather rare in being told, some of the aspects of the story.
Yeah, I
in
think
terms of children.
Yeah, I think it was pretty raw and pretty cutting edge a little bit.
I want to call out a couple of supporting roles that are beautifully played. First, Edgar Buchanan, Uncle Joe from Petticoat Junction. He plays Applejack, which is such a great name, and I think a future dog should be named Applejack. He is Cary Grant's kind of newspaper assistant. He ultimately becomes the family friend to both of them. And Beulah Bondi is the best and is just absolutely touching in her role as Miss Oliver, who's the head of the adoption agency. A couple of other things to call out just in terms of the film itself. Once Grant and Dunn are married, Grant has to leave right away for Japan, and Dunn will meet him in a couple of months. So they have their goodbyes on the train. And of course, the train starts to take off, and George Stevens positions the camera. When they're in the cabin kissing and they're sitting, he positions the camera so that the door is half shut and you kind of see them and you kind of don't. I thought of it as very edgy for that time period. Such a lovely way to capture what we know is happening, but we don't have to see it all.
Yeah.
And he also, I thought George Stevens captured this foreboding throughout the whole film of what's going to happen ultimately. Cary Grant has to be noted here for his dramatic performance, which he was nominated for an Academy Award, particularly for this powerful monologue that he has late in the film as he stands before the adoption judge pleading his case for his child. It's just absolutely
heart-wrenching.
Heartbreaking. Yeah. It's a three-hanky melodrama, no doubt about it. Dunn and Grant were in 3 films together. This one, Penny Serenade, The Awful Truth, which we talked about for our 30s episode, and My Favorite Wife. And Grant has said that Penny Serenade was his favorite film. Another interesting side note, ladies, according to George Stevens Jr., who was interviewed on TCM about his father, the studio paid Cary Grant $136,000. They paid Irene Dunn $85,000, and she has top billing.
Wow, even back then.
Yeah, pay disparity. It's available free right now on Tubi.
Okay, I'm going to beat a dead horse again.
Yes.
Why was Irene Dunn not Oscar nominated for this performance? It's brilliant.
So true.
Yeah.
So true.
So my next film, you mentioned Preston Sturges.
Yes.
You know he's one of my absolute favorite screenwriters and directors.
Yes.
Well, the next picture is Christmas in July, which he directed in 1940. He wrote many hits like Easy Living from 1937, which I actually included in our episode about our favorite films of the 30s.
Yes.
He also wrote If I Were King, 1938, Remember the Night, again, Barbara Stanwyck, 1940. But he really hit his stride when he started directing movies that he wrote. And these included The Lady Eve, which you just mentioned, 1941. 1941.
Right.
Sullivan's Travels,
Yeah,
fantastic,
fabulous.
1941. Joel McCrea and Veronica Lake. The Palm Beach Story, Claudette Colbert, 1942. And The Miracle of Morgan's Creek, 1944. Well, one of my favorite films of his is Christmas in July, and it's one of his lesser-known movies.
Yes.
Not a lot of people know this one. It's this farcical, witty, down-to-earth story that's just full of this fast-paced comedy, and it's based on a play called A Cup of Coffee, which Preston Sturges wrote in 1931. Well, Christmas in July, it's a story of an everyday kind of office worker named Jimmy McDonald, played by the delightful Dick Powell. Well, Jimmy dreams of winning this $25,000 cash prize in this writing competition for writing a winning slogan for a coffee company.
Okay.
Well, he enters the contest. He's sure he's got the winning jingle because he really wants to provide for his mother, played by Georgia Kane, and he finally wants to marry his long-suffering girlfriend, Betty Casey, played by the wonderful Ellen Drew.
Oh, yes.
Well, his coworkers do a little dirty trick on him.
Uh-oh.
And they send him a telegram saying that he actually won the contest and he was going to get the money. Well, he's so overwhelmed and thrilled that all comic hell breaks loose because he goes on a spending spree on credit because the money's coming to buy his mother things and his friends things and to take care of the people he loves. Well, you can imagine what happens.
Yes.
When he finds out he doesn't really have $25,000 and he's gone on this crazy spending spree.
For other people.
For other people, because he's such a kind-hearted soul. Well, the movie just has so much heart. It has so much sweetness. It really captures the period, I think, before World War II.
Yeah.
When there was such an innocence around the country. And it's just beautifully, beautifully done. And it just benefits so greatly from the supporting cast, which included many of Preston Sturges's stock players, I call them.
Yes.
You know, Raymond Walburn, Alexander Carr, William Demarest, again,
Yeah.
Uncle Charlie, Franklin Pangborn, who we've talked about on this
love
podcast
him.
before, Jimmy Conlon, one of my favorite character actors, and Robert Warwick. Rod Cameron's also in it in an early role. In 1988, and I find this so interesting, Preston Sturges's original play, A Cup of Coffee, which is what Christmas in July is based on, was produced off-Broadway to rave reviews.
Wow.
So if you haven't seen this one, it's a beauty of a film.
Oh, good. Adding it to the list. Well, I think it's time for this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz. Steve.
Yes, and the pop quiz today is one of my favorite films of the 40s, which I'm going to talk about a little later,
Okay.
is High Sierra,
Oh.
which of course stars Humphrey Bogart, Ida Lupino, Joan Leslie. Incredible movie, and I'll tell you all about it in a minute. But it was remade in 1955 to maybe less spectacular results. What was the name of the remake and who starred in it?
We will have the answer to that, the rest of what's on our list for our favorite 1940s films, right after this.
All right, Steve and Ann will be right back, but first another stop on the Hollywood tour. Everyone knows that 1963's Cleopatra starred Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. But did you know that writer-director Joseph Mankiewicz was fired during post-production? It was due to the quarrels he was having with Darryl Zanuck, the newly reinstalled Fox president, over the nature of editing the film's length. Now, since Mankiewicz wrote the script as he was shooting, 20th Century Fox soon realized that only Mankiewicz knew how the story fit together. He was then brought back to complete the project. What's more, Cleopatra was seriously expensive. The film originally had a budget of $5 million. It was one of the most expensive movies to ever be made at that point in time. But after 2 years, they still weren't finished filming, and they had to put even more money into the project. Adjusted for today, the movie would now cost over $420 million. That's a lot of Roman coins, huh? And now back to Steve and Ann from Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Welcome back, everybody. Before we get any further into our favorite 1940s movies, I wanted to give a special shout out to our listener of the week. And this week, it's Erin Carlson. Erin has her own podcast about classic cinema called Stars of the Golden Age. And if you haven't checked it out, you really should. She's a great researcher. She really does deep dives into some of your favorite celebrities. I listened to a couple of them, one on Hattie McDaniel and Barbara Stanwyck, which were just fantastic. So Erin, you're our listener of the week, and we wish you well on your podcast and hope that other people will check it out.
Yes, thank you, Aaron.
Hey, Aaron.
Diving in with the next film on my list, Gaslight, 1944.
Yes.
Directed by George Cukor, written by John Van Druten, Walter Reich, John L. Balderston, based on the play Angel Street by Patrick Hamilton. The film is set in the 1880s. 10 years after her aunt was murdered in their London home, Paula Ulquist, played by Ingrid Bergman, returns from Italy to live in that same London home with her new husband, Gregory Anton, played by Charles Boyer, after they've had this 2-week whirlwind romance.
There's always a red flag right there.
Oh my gosh. This film is a testament to maybe date the guy a little bit longer before you marry him.
Yeah.
Because Gregory Anton is not who he appears to be. A key plot point to this film is that since Paula Bergman is grappling with her aunt's unsolved murder, note that, flag that, unsolved murder, once they move into her home, Gregory suggests that all of the aunt's furnishings be stored in the attic. And there's a very important reason for that I won't divulge in case you haven't seen the film. But suffice to say, his obsessive interest in the home is all about a pretty big and diabolical secret. And to get what he's after may or may not involve driving his wife insane. So there's that. In addition to Charles Boyer and Ingrid Bergman, this film stars Joseph Cotton as a Scotland Yard police constable, Brian Cameron, who is a lovely person, not Joseph Cotton's favorite thing I've ever seen him do.
No.
But I have to give a shout out to the amazing Angela Lansbury as the surly maid Nancy. It's her film debut at age 18, and she is the maid that you love to hate. Now, this film was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Actor for Charles Boyer, Best Supporting Actress for Angela Lansbury, and Best Actress for Ingrid Bergman, who actually won for the role.
So well-deserved, that Oscar.
And it's the first of 3 Academy Awards for her, the other 2 being for Anastasia in 1956 and Murder on the Orient Express in 1975. I've mentioned the performance of Boyer briefly on our Valentine's Day episode in the film Love Affair with Irene Dunn.
Yeah, our girl.
Right. And so Gaslight cast him against type as a villain. He was typically cast as that sort of leading man. However, Gaslight was the very first film when I was young that I saw Charles Boyer in. So I would never have guessed that he was cast against type.
Yeah.
The point being, that's how wonderful he is in this film. You would think that he always plays the bad guy.
Did you grow up just hating him because you thought he was such a heel?
I did. I thought he was a heel. I was like, should I love him? Should I hate him? He straddles that so beautifully until the end when, you figure out what's going on. But the main reason to see this film is the performance of Ingrid Bergman, a role which she herself considered one of her greatest challenges. I just have to read this description of her performance from the New York Times because it perfectly encapsulates what she did. Quote, girlishly trusting, passionately in love, tragically confused, hysterically terrified, and implacably vengeful by turns, she runs a strenuous gamut of emotions to play her final scene as though it were a Shakespearean tragedy.
Ooh.
Isn't that well done?
Boy, that encapsulates her performance perfectly.
Yeah, I think it is so hard to play crazy and not have it seem like it's a tick or something that's a caricature, a stereotype of what that is. And she just plays it so beautifully.
That final scene where she sort of turned the tables on him is just brilliant.
Yeah, it's chilling. I just got goosebumps thinking about it. Just a little side note, Bergman was taller than Boyer, necessitating an apple box. If you don't know what that is, it's just a little wooden box to step on. So Boyer would stand on it when they were doing some of these scenes, making for some very awkward kissing scenes where she would hit her foot into the box and they'd have to redo it. And there's also an earlier version of this film from 1940, the prints of which MGM tried to have destroyed when they were remaking this film. Wouldn't that be nice? Just get rid of anybody else that's competition.
Any competition, yes. We don't want to be compared to the earlier version.
Right. Some of the prints are still out there. Full disclosure, I have not seen that version
I would
of the
love
film.
to see it.
Yeah. But one last thing about this, the term that we now use as gaslighting is taken from this film, and it's defined as a psychological manipulation of a person, usually over an extended period of time, that causes the victim to question the validity of their own thoughts, reality, and the uncertainty of their mental stability.
Yeah.
So it's pretty much a case study on that.
And in context, in terms of the movie, it was really quite literal.
Yes.
Because at the time, there were only gas lights in the house,
Yes.
and she kept seeing them dim.
Yep.
but he kept telling her they weren't dimming.
Yes.
So gaslighting.
Yeah, it's really a wonderful film. One of my top favorites.
Yes, me too. Good choice. Well, my next one, it was our question of the day. It's High Sierra, 1941. This was Humphrey Bogart's first real breakout film that moved him from supporting actor to leading man. The role had been famously turned down by George Raft, which I think we mentioned in our casting episode we did a few weeks ago. High Sierra is based on the W.R. Burnett novel, and it was written for the screen by Burnett and Bogart's friend and drinking buddy, John Huston.
Okay.
High Sierra was a crime drama with elements of film noir. Directed by Raoul Walsh, it benefited greatly from location shooting in Lone Pine, California, and halfway up Mount Whitney in the Sierra Nevada mountain range.
Yeah.
Very key part of the movie is the elements and the locations. High Sierra tells the story of Roy Earl, played by Bogart, a newly released convict who, along with his cohorts, Louis Mendoza, played by Cornell Wilde, Red, played by Arthur Kennedy, and Babe, played by Alan Curtis, and they're planning another high-stakes robbery of a mountain resort hotel. Well, along for the ride is a dance hall girl named Marie.
Oh, isn't there always one along for the ride?
There's always a dance hall girl named Marie. And, of course, she's played by the exquisite Ida Lupino, who I would also put in the top tier of my favorite actresses.
Yes.
And, of course, Marie is in love with Roy. But Roy isn't so in love with her. Problem. Well, along the way, Roy and his gang meet up with a family of Velma Goodhue, played by Joan Leslie, and she's this young woman with a clubbed foot. She has trouble walking. She has a big, heavy limp, and Roy kind of falls in love with this young girl. You know, she represents everything he's not. She's the innocent. She's the lovely. She's the soft. She's everything that his life isn't. And so he really gets this infatuation for this young girl, and he really tries to help her. He pays for this corrective surgery to allow Velma to walk normally. Despite her grandfather, played by the great Henry Travers, who I know we've talked about before in character actors, he warns Roy. He says, you know, Velma's got a boyfriend back home. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do this. But, you know, Roy's in love and he does it. And while she's recovering, Roy visits Velma. He checks on her. And over the course of time, he thinks that Velma is falling for him. But I think it's more gratitude.
Okay.
And he misses the clues.
Right.
Well, he asks Velma to marry him, but, you know, she refuses and explains again, I'm already engaged to somebody else. And this really crushes Roy. And then later, when Velma's fiance arrives, Roy really sees that she has no interest in him. And in this rejection, he finally sees what's right in front of him the whole time.
Yep.
Ida Lupino.
Of course. How could you miss her?
How could you miss her? Well, back to what's going on with the gang. Things go terribly, terribly wrong with the heist. And Roy and Marie find themselves running from the law, leading to one of the most exciting climactic chases and standoffs in film history. If you haven't seen the ending of that movie, my God, it's like a Greek tragedy. It's this powerful, suspenseful film that also has some great themes of redemption. And the chemistry between Humphrey Bogart and Ida Lupino is incredible. And it was the second screen pairing of these two. You know, right after they Drive by Night in 1940. And it's a shame they weren't paired together more often because I don't know about you, but I found not a lot of leading women could hold their own with Bogart.
Yep.
He tended to knock a lot of them off the screen.
Yep.
And, you know, there were a few like Lauren Bacall and Gloria Graham, Katharine Hepburn, I would even say Elizabeth Scott to a degree.
Yeah.
They could hold their own. And Ida certainly could too. So I'm surprised they didn't put them in more pictures together. Well, the supporting cast was terrific. Henry Hull, Jerome Cowan, Mina Gombell, Barton McLean, Elizabeth Risden, Donald McBride, Paul Harvey, Isabel Jewell, Willie Best. I love Willie Best. And then George Meeker. Great supporting cast. And stealing almost every scene he's in is Zero the dog, who plays a dog called Pard in the movie. And he plays a very significant role in the ending of the film.
Yes.
You just got to see it to understand it. And I look back at this film and I think about one of the great gifts of my life was meeting and becoming friends with Joan Leslie.
Yes.
You know, and Joan played Velma in High Sierra. My good friend Ann Rutherford, who we talk about all the time, she introduced me to Joan and her wonderful, wonderful husband, Dr. Bill Caldwell, back in the early 90s. We had a wonderful lunch the first time we met at the now defunct restaurant Citrus on Melrose.
Citrus.
Any of you remember? And Joan was just lovely. She's just one of the greatest women. And she was always just as lovely as you'd expect and want her to be. She was so genuinely surprised that anybody would have any interest in any of her old movies.
That is shocking.
Which always surprises me when I
Yes.
talk to people like that. They're like, why would someone your age care about my old movies?
Right.
Little did she know.
Yeah.
Well, I remember her saying how kind Humphrey Bogart was to her. Because she was kind of a young actress and nervous.
I love hearing
he
that.
really soothed her and was really wonderful.
Yeah.
And she loved Ida Lupino.
Okay.
They became really good friends. And she felt like Ida didn't suffer fools gladly. And she was very quick to take up for herself and others that she felt were disparaged.
Yeah.
She and Lupino would later star in the great Vincent Sherman-directed film The Hard Way a couple of years later to great critical success and a win for Ida as the New York Critics' Best Actress that year.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
great movie.
All right. My last film, Mildred Pierce, 1945.
Yes.
Directed by Michael Curtiz, written by Ranald McDougall, based on the novel by James M. Cain, who also wrote the novels for Double Indemnity.
And the Postman
Always Rings Twice.
Yes.
So there were no less than 8 contract writers who worked on this script, including
Wow.
William Faulkner and Catherine Turney, who apparently had a pretty big impact on the structure of the script, but who resisted the murder aspect of the film. She left the project and is quoted as saying that she forever regretted having her name taken off the project.
I'll bet.
Now, the film begins with the murder of Monty Barragon, played by Zachary Scott, who we've spoken about on this podcast.
We love Zachary Scott here.
He's the second husband of Mildred Pierce, played, of course, by Joan Crawford. Now, at the beginning of this film, as I said, it starts at the end. Mildred is being questioned by the police, who suspect that her first husband committed the murder. The story is then told in flashback, set in 1930s Glendale, California, where our podcast studio is located.
Glamorous Glendale.
Glamorous Glendale. We're introduced to Mildred's first husband, Bert, who has just lost his job. Mildred and Bert, played by Bruce Bennett, are not in sync as to how their 2 daughters should be raised. Daughter number 1 is Vida, a 16-year-old spoiled social climber, played by Anne Blythe. Daughter number 2 is Kay, a 10-year-old tomboy, played by Joanne Marlowe. Mildred ends up putting her daughters above the marriage, above everything, really. When Mildred suspects that Bert is having an affair, she kicks him out, and she will do anything for her daughters now that she's on her own and has to keep this whole household afloat. So she sells pies that she makes with her maid, played by Butterfly McQueen. She gets a job as a waitress at a restaurant where she and the hostess Ida, played by the amazing Eve Arden, become friends, and she eventually decides to open a restaurant. With the help of family friend Wally, played by Jack Carson, she secures a building to open the restaurant. The building happens to be owned by Playboy Monty Barragon, who started the film. Dead. Now, the younger daughter, Kay, unfortunately, spoiler alert, close your ears if you haven't seen this, she dies of pneumonia.
Poor Kay.
So Mildred's ambition for Vida goes into overdrive because this is her only daughter. Vida, who looks down on her mother for waitressing and running a restaurant where she smells of grease, has absolutely no trouble accepting the wonderful gifts that her mother gives her, including a car. Suffice to say, Vida is a bad seed.
Vita's a bitch.
She is horrible. At every turn, for Vida, it's all about the money.
Yeah.
To the point where, it's horrible. She fakes a pregnancy to get some settlement money from her former fiancé. Like I said, bad seed.
Bad.
If you have not seen it, I'm not going to give away any other spoilers. If you have seen it, I love how our TCM friend Eddie Muller describes it. He calls it noir-stained maternal melodrama. It hits it all. It hits it all,
That's
right?
perfect.
Arguably Crawford's best performance.
Oh, hands down.
Yeah. Now, lots of actresses vying for the role of Mildred Pierce, among them Barbara Stanwyck, our fave. But Joan Crawford famously screen tested for it, which was unheard of for a star of her stature. But she had been released by MGM. She hadn't been seen on screen for 2 years, so she was pretty much willing to do anything to get the leading role.
She really needed it.
Yeah, she needed a win, and this film is considered her famous comeback. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress. Now, legend has it, she thought that Ingrid Bergman was going to win for The Bells of St. Mary. So Crawford stayed home, didn't attend, said she was sick. When she heard on the radio that she won, she put on some makeup and invited the press over. And she received them in bed.
Apparently she wasn't too sick to receive reporters.
Oh my gosh. Well, I do love that about her, and I
Yes.
love this performance, but I do want to focus for a minute on the performance of Anne Blythe.
Oh,
Because
yes.
without Anne Blythe, this film would not be successful. She was just 16 years old when she made this film, and she holds her own magnificently up against Crawford. Crawford, who already had the part, actually screen tested with Anne to help her and helped her during filming. In a number of interviews that I watched with Anne Blyth, she has nothing but lovely things to say about Crawford. And let me tell you, Anne Blyth as Vida, she is the epitome of the daughter from hell, but she plays it with such a subtle, dark streak.
Yes.
And she's cast completely against type.
Yes.
But she found a way into that character that makes that portrayal indelible. She was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress, as was the lovely Eve Arden, who has one of my favorite lines in cinema history, which is,
Personally, Vida's convinced me that alligators have the right idea. They eat their young.
Iconic.
Yes.
Iconic. And it was interesting to see Anne Blyth play this evil character because
Yes.
her entire career, she had been the sweet young thing, the
Yes.
innocent, the girl next door, and then she
Yes.
finally gets this meaty role. And you would have thought that after she did Vida, that it would have opened up meatier parts for her, but it really didn't, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, and part of, I think, what happened is right after the film came out, she was in a tobogganing accident.
Yeah.
She broke her back, and so for 2 years, she was
Yeah.
kind of out of the picture. And I think by the time she got back in, perhaps that momentum,
had
lost.
died
But
down.
she's a terrific actress.
And you know, she is still with us.
I know.
And actually, on August the 16th, she will turn 96. So
Yes.
an early happy birthday to the
Anne
lovely
Blyth.
Anne Blyth.
And we'd love to have you on our podcast.
Oh, please.
All right, what's your last one?
You know, my last one, and this is a movie that I just love. When I was in college, I took a Southern Lit class, and one of the required readings was Robert Penn Warren's novel, All the King's Men. Which is just this fascinating look at politics and corruption and the human spirit. I was just blown away by the complexity of this political animal of Willie Stark, who is the main character. And physically, in the book, he's described as big eyes, which had the suggestion of sleepy and inward look, the pouches under the eyes and the jowls beginning to sag off, and the meaty lips, which didn't sag, but if you looked real close, were laid on top of each other like a couple of bricks.
Whoa.
And the tousle of hair hanging down on the very high, squarish forehead. To me, with that description, there was nobody who could have done this role except for Broderick Crawford.
Yeah.
You know, he was born to play Willie Stark, and he's so incredible in the role.
Such a great choice.
And you know, and the entire cast was really amazing in this movie. And really, as far as reading the book first, I don't think they could have done a better job.
So often that's not the case.
Oh,
so,
not
yeah,
the case.
That's great.
But, you know, Mercedes McCambridge, she was the perfect person to play Sadie Burke,
Yes.
who's this rough around the edges political advisor and also mistress to Willie Stark.
Yes.
You know, John Ireland is so good as the idealistic young journalist. And then Joanne Drew is so good as John Ireland's sort of lost love who gets corrupted by Willie Stark in his world. And then there was John Derrick as Willie's weak son. Incredible, incredible cast.
Yeah.
This political drama was reportedly based on the corrupt governor of Louisiana, Huey Long. The film so heartbreakingly shows how an honest politician can succumb to the corruption around him and lose his way as Willie Stark did. It's part Greek tragedy, it's part Shakespearean, it's part soap opera.
Yeah.
But it's just this powerful and affecting film that makes you take a hard look at the politics of the day and wonder, has anything really changed?
I was going to say, it's such a timely film for right now.
Yeah, it really is. And, you know, the rest of the supporting cast was top notch. I mean, there was Shepard Strudwick, there was Ralph Dumke, Raymond Greenleaf, but especially, and I give a special shout out to Anne Seymour as
I
Willie
love
Stark's
her.
sort of put upon wife.
Yes.
Who's so wonderful in this role. She just steals every scene she's in. The film went on to win 3 Oscars, including Best Picture.
Okay.
Best Actor for Broderick Crawford, and Best Supporting Actress for McCambridge. It also was nominated for Best Director for Robert Rossen, Best Supporting Actor for John Ireland, Best Screenplay, and Best Editing. And it was remade, I might add, in 2006 with Sean Penn, Jude Law, and Kate Winslet. And it was a disaster.
Now, it's so funny because I love all 3 of those actors.
Oh, it was so horrible and so unwatchable. And I don't know, just a hint, and I know I'm going to catch hell for this, but if you're telling a story that's so deeply rooted in the South, where Southern culture and politics and nuances are of major importance, maybe don't hire so many Brit actors.
Yeah, that's 2 Brits and 1 American.
I know.
The other thing that's so interesting about remakes, and it's something someone said to me once, don't remake the perfect movie.
Yes.
Remake the bad ones.
Okay, I say that all the time.
It's like,
I say,
why would you remake something that was perfection?
find a great old B movie that didn't quite take off, that has a great story.
Yes.
Remake that. Don't remake The Graduate.
Yeah.
Please.
We have unfortunately run out of time. Here's the thing. I had
so many movies to tell.
other things. Okay, Philadelphia Story. His Girl Friday. Rope. Gilda.
Yes, Gilda.
Snake
so many.
Pit. I mean, too many.
I
Too
know.
many. So,
Well,
you know what? We'll just do this another time.
We'll do some more.
Yeah. But first, let's get the answer to this week's Hollywood Pop Quiz.
And the question was, I love High Sierra, Humphrey Bogart, Ida Lupino, Joan Leslie. It was remade in 1955, and what was the name of the remake and who starred in it?
And the answer is?
The answer is I Died 1,000 Times, made in 1955, which starred Jack Palance and Shelley Winters.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've never seen it. Have you?
I have seen it.
And?
It's not nearly as good, but it's good. But not nearly as good
And
as High
only,
Sierra.
what year was High Sierra again?
41.
Okay,
yeah.
so only 14 years
Yeah.
later, they remade it. Well, go figure. We would love it if you would give us a 5-star review, and if you would follow us on social media. Our handle is @FromBeneathTheHollywood We're on Instagram, Facebook, and you can watch the podcast on YouTube.
And we love hearing from you, so maybe email us. What's your favorite film of the 40s? We can be reached at info@FromBeneathTheHollywood
That's this week's view.
From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. That was for you, Lynn.
Oh my God. That sounded like a song. From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
I can redo that.
You've been listening to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign with Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara, the podcast that celebrates amazing stories of Tinseltown from its golden era. Join us next week for another episode and learn something else about Hollywood you probably never knew. Take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review. And tell your friends about us too. It'll help grow the podcast. Visit Steve's website at FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. The executive producers are Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. Executive producer and post-production supervisor Lindsay Schnebley. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like The Box of Oddities and The Shallow End with Schnebley and Toth. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved. That's a wrap.